A little more than 50 years ago, when I was a law student at the University of Virginia, I was at my desk and the phone rang. I picked up the phone and a secretary said, "Are you available to talk to Mr. Justice Black?" I said, "Certainly." And shortly thereafter made a trip to Washington, met the justice, and was fortunate enough, privileged enough, to become one of his law clerks in the 1970 term. He was one of the great giants of American law, the fifth longest serving justice. He served from 1937 to 1971, and he was an immense force in my life, to the point where my son carries his middle name, Hugo. The justice taught me many, many things. Among the most important was the humility of intelligence. He was a brilliant man, but he viewed himself as less educated than many of his colleagues, and therefore had to work harder to master the whole history of the court and indeed the history of the Constitution. So that intellectual humility was one of the most important things that he gave me. In addition, the judge was a wonderful human being, and he liked to have his clerks, or one of his clerks, live close to his house in Alexandria, so that after the workday they could come to his house and work at night on whatever the problems of the day were, whether it was an opinion or an emergency petition for relief from some litigant. And we would work in his study until 11 o'clock at night. And at 11 o'clock at night, and I don't mean 11:01 or 10:95 or 10:59, Mrs. Black would enter the study and turn on the television, and the three of us would watch the late evening news. And the judge would comment on what was going on in the Nixon administration or what other things were in the news. And I saw this whole history of his life played out in his comments. I mean, he was a law student, a medical student, a local judge, a special prosecutor, and a United States senator before he was appointed. He'd seen a sweep of modern history. It was quite a privilege to participate in that rendition of our history. The judge also had some wonderful other traits. When his clerks would argue for some constitutional position that he thought was dubious, he would open the center desk drawer of his desk, and he would pull out a copy of the U.S. Constitution, the government printing office version that was available to the public for 10 cents. And he would hand the document to his clerks, and he would say, "Now show me where it says that." And you learned very quickly that you better found your constitutional arguments in the language of the document, or you were going to be confronted with fumbling through the Constitution looking for something that wasn't there. The judge also had an interesting view of the role of a judge, and that was something of a hermit. He had been very politically active, but he recused himself from politics. And I remember a story that he told us about the first time he was ever sought to be influenced by a president. And it was the Roosevelt administration, and he was at a White House function, and he went through the receiving line, and when they got to the president pulled him aside. And this was right after the judge had been the fifth vote to uphold the National Labor Relations Act, and the president pulled him aside and said, "Hugo, you're doing fine, Hugo." He says, "That's the only time a president ever tried to influence me."